Climate change from a South African's perspective. We focus generally on waste. Just to let you know, my colleague and I just went to the Turkish Pavilion, and this is their main theme, zero waste. So it's really relevant. It's just a conversation that needs to happen. So yeah, I thought I'd just share that with you. So it's been submitted that even if existing pledges and national targets are achieved, emission reduction won't be sufficient to limit global warming to the 1.5. And implementing circular economies and strategies is vital to close that gap. The view is really transitioning away from a linear economy to a circular economy is vital to tackling climate change. And I'm going to give you some statistics later which just show how important it really is. The topic of today's talk is particularly pertinent given that one of the topics under the negotiating mandate is putting nature, people, lives and livelihoods at the heart of climate action. And it's one of the thematic themes of multi-level action, urbanization and the built environment. So we're highlighting sustainable development and circular systems. Quite an interesting question has come up. Does a plastic crisis equal a climate crisis? According to the OECD, plastic production has doubled in 20 years. In 2019, a total of 460 million tons was made. 2/3 of that plastic waste was discarded after only being used once or a few times, and less than 10% is recycled. So those are quite concerning statistics. It's dumped in the environment or improperly burnt. The vast majority of virgin plastics are derived from petrochemical feedstocks, such as natural gas or crude oil. So the rapid growth of the industry is a significant source of greenhouse gases that drive global heating. According to a Dalberg report, plastic production will account to up to 20% of the global carbon budget by 2040, accelerating the climate crisis. It's a really relevant talk. So following from the United Nations Environment Assembly 514 resolution last year to end plastic pollution, negotiations to develop an international binding treaty on plastic pollution will continue to the end of 2024, with an emphasis on reducing plastic pollution on the sea and promoting a comprehensive approach that addresses the full life cycle of plastic. So there's broad consensus that this treaty is needed, but there's very different opposing views. High ambition nations are calling for binding rules to reduce the use of production of plastic, while manufacturers and main producer countries are campaigning for just recycling and better waste management. At the third session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee held in Nairobi now in November to discuss the zero draft, which is the first draft, the chair of the forum's Intergovernmental Committee warned that plastic pollution posed a direct threat to our environment, human health, and the delicate balance of our planet. Kenyan President William Ruto described plastic pollution as an existential threat to life, to humanity and everything in between, and that to deal with plastic pollution, humanity must change. We must change the way we consume, the way we produce, and how we dispose of waste. And a figure from 2017, so it's quite a few years ago, Africa generated 180 million tons of solid waste, and 90% of that went to uncontrolled landfills. If we carry on as a business as usual scenario, it's estimated that 500 million tons of waste will be generated by Africa by 2050. That's more than the world was producing in 2020. It's a lot of waste. So with that in mind, my fellow speakers and I today will look at the circular economy in South Africa. We're going to look at some of the voluntary initiatives that are being undertaken. We're going to look at the policies, programs and legislation, achieving required outcomes and to drive. How does South Africa compare internationally? We've compared some of the jurisdictions to see where South Africa is, how far are we? And where does South Africa stand should the international treaty lead to obligatory measures to curb plastic production? Importantly, and also specific to developing countries, is the very important role of the informal sector in South Africa, where large volumes of waste are being diverted from landfill sites through informal work. Among all the developing regions, the vast majority of informal employment activities are found in Africa. 85% of the population earn their income from doing informal work. So by virtue of their activities, these people, informal reclaimers, are key players in driving circular economy countries. So I'm pleased to be joined today online by Bonti and Tanya Zak, who's going to be producing a video. Bonti is an environmental scientist and sustainability consultant with 20 years' experience in environmental project management and legislative processes for the environmental and waste management sector. Her interest lies in identifying opportunities to apply circular economy principles. She has expertise in resource efficiency, waste diversion projects, zero waste to landfill strategies, sustainability, and business greening. Dr. Tanya Zak is a known researcher, a professional planner, and popular writer in Johannesburg. She recently co-authored a book with Mark Lewis, Wake Up, This is Johannesburg. The issues she grapples with are really important in cities like Johannesburg. They're urban issues of the contemporary African city. They include migration, informal work, high-density living, cross-border trade, waste reclaiming, sustainable earnable development, and the role of urban policy in confronting the complex contestations of a city like Johannesburg. So Bonti's going to be talking about a circular economy is an important part of addressing climate change, but transitioning to a circular economy can be intimidating and overwhelming. However, as individuals, there are innovative approaches, technologies, or businesses that we can support while growing our local economies and building resilient communities. Bonti will take us through what a circular economy is and how we can get there, and she'll present a few local examples and case studies to show how we can be part of the journey. Thanks, Bonti.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for that. And yeah, I'm honored to be part of this, even if it's just virtually. Maybe next year I'll attend in person. Okay. Are my slides showing? I'm still seeing the introductory slide. Great. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to provide a high-level look at circular economy. We're not going to go into the details of it because I'm assuming everyone has at least heard of it or you've got a rough idea of what it is. But I think very importantly, we've heard some quite alarming statistics and drastic actions that need to be taken. Some of it can be quite depressing. But what I want to show us today as well is how we can be part of this change. There's a lot of change that needs to happen. It needs to be collaborative and across the board. From us as individuals, from the bottom up and from the top down. So hopefully we don't leave too depressed after my presentation today. Okay, next slide. So this is an iconic view of Table Mountain in Cape Town, where obviously I'm from. But this, yeah, I mean, it's well known across the world, tourism destination. But there is another view of Table Mountain that not many people get to see. We often put our waste out, bins on the pavement, bags on the pavement, and then we forget about them. But if you show us the next slide, I can show you a picture of another view of Table Mountain and a view from one of Cape Town's landfill sites. So this is a landfill site showing another view of Cape Town. We're running out of landfill airspace, and I think that's something we all know. Here you can see waste being dumped, and if you just move on to the next slide, it'll give us the tonnages. We are generating approximately 4,600 tons of general waste in the city of Cape Town every day. Our population is just under 5 million. So on a citywide average, we're probably per person generating just less than a kilogram per day of waste, which doesn't really sound like a lot, or does it? If you work that out over a year, that's a lot of waste. And this is a problem we need to deal with. We can't just keep generating and building mountains and mountains of landfill site. But there's another problem with this picture. If you look closely, it's not the best picture, but you can see that there are people in this picture. It's not just the environment that we are impacting with this waste that we're generating, but there are people in this picture that are working in dangerous and unhealthy conditions. And Tina mentioned this as well. This is part of our informal sector that are a solution to one of the problems we've created, but it's not necessarily the best solution if this is their living conditions. Next slide. Here, more images of the informal sector. This is on landfill sites. And I think the important thing and these are street waste pickers, the important thing to realize is if they are prepared to work in these conditions, it's not just a means of making an income for themselves, which is very, very important. These are entrepreneurs in their own right, but they are scavenging valuable materials that we are just throwing away. Why are we throwing these things away if they are that valuable? What is wrong with the system? Okay, we can move on to the next slides. But we are going to hear a little bit more about the informal sector. This is just another image that we see also linked quite closely to climate change. There's a lot more flooding. We've got a lot more high rainfall events. And what these are doing is they're illustrating the plastic pollution in our rivers and waterways that are ending up on our beaches. We're seeing headlines like this one. We made plastic, we depend on it, now we're drowning in it. And you're going to hear a lot more about this, I'm sure. And these are quite depressing images. What these headlines don't tell us, what can we do about this? So we know that waste is going to carry on increasing, and especially at the rate of overconsumption that we are, just the trajectory that we are on at the moment. It is very depressing. Next slide. So the reality is that our current economy operates on a linear model. We take resources, we make things, and we dispose of them. We are relying on cheap, easily accessible materials and energy to make these things. This is putting growing pressure on our resources and the environment, and also society. So this has highlighted the necessity to rethink materials and energy use, and now really is the right time to take advantage of the potential benefits of a circular economy. Next slide. So waste is a human concept. It's an indicator of a problem, that our economy is built on the wasteful production of goods and services. But at the same time, we've come to accept the existence of waste, pollution, and resource depletion as an unavoidable consequence of our modern society and economy. But surely waste indicates that there's an obvious flaw in the design of our economy. We are leaking materials that are being picked up on landfill sites by the informal sector. Our landfill sites are not getting smaller, they're not slowing down, they're filling up faster, and the design of our products is getting worse and worse. Next slide. So we need to move from a linear economy to a circular economy, where we keep materials in circulation at all times. We need to transform this take, make, waste into circular cycles, keeping our technical and biological nutrients in circulation. We need a thriving economy that can benefit everyone and operate within the limits of our planet. Next slide. So this is the well-known butterfly diagram that was developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And it shows the green cycles are the biological nutrients that we keep in circulation. And the blue loops are the technical nutrients. And the whole idea is that we keep these loops going for as long as possible. And any waste that leaves the system is called materials leakage. So how do we do this? How do we keep our materials in circulation? So the first loop you'll see is about sharing. So we maintain our products and materials. We keep them in use for as long as possible. But very important, in order to do this, is they need to be designed in this manner. They need to be designed so that we can maintain and repair them. And then for even longer lasting products, we can share them within our economy. We don't all have to have ownership. This ownership model also needs to change our thinking around that. We need to reuse and redistribute products and materials. So once you've used it, it needs to still be in a good enough condition that we can maybe pass it on to someone else to reuse, so that it doesn't necessarily need to be completely recycled or remade. Refurbishing and remanufacturing. So when things do have reached an end of their life, we do refurbish them or restore their value so that we can continue to use them in their existing form. And then the last loop in this is recycle, which is something I think we're all very much more familiar with. And there's a common misconception very often when we're thinking about the circular economies, we need to keep recycling things. But as you can see, there are a whole lot of loops that we need to go through before we recycle items. Recycling really is a last resort. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so what is a circular economy? It's restorative, regenerative by design. So you can see the images on the right-hand side, a linear economy straight into the bin, recycling economy, a couple of loops before it gets to the bin. But a circular economy, we keep our materials out of the bin forever, hopefully, obviously, not entirely possible, but it is a dream. So we aim to keep products, their components and materials at their highest utility and value at all times. So circular economy, like I said, distinguishes between technical and biological cycles. So that also means our organic waste, our food waste shouldn't be going to landfill. We should be composting those, and these get added to the land, soil enhancement, and things like regenerative agriculture is one of the ways we need to continue to produce our food. So it really is a continuous and positive development cycle. So in order to do this, we really need to redesign our products and our systems to keep our materials in use at all times. Okay, next slide. So three of the main principles of the circular economy is that, as I've mentioned, we need to design out waste and pollution. The design stage of products are roughly about 80% of the environmental impacts of a product are determined during the design stage. So they're not actually, they don't come about, but they will come about due to the design. So we have the biggest opportunity to reduce waste and pollution when we are designing products and systems and services. So we need to change our mindset to view waste as a design flaw, not just an outcome of something that we've done. We also need to be able to keep products and materials in use at all times. We can't just keep wasting these resources because we think there'll be more. We are going to run out. So we need to design our products so we can keep them in use. And then, as I mentioned, we also need to regenerate natural systems so that there is no concept of waste. So everything becomes food for something else, whether it's technical or organic. And instead of simply trying to do less harm, we should aim to do good and do better. Next slide. Okay. So this is an adaptation of the Ellen MacArthur butterfly diagram. This is from Alex Nemill's work on circular human flows. And what's really cool about this is that what he's done is he's put people in the center of the circular economy. So he calls it the circular human sphere. So regenerating natural systems doesn't just apply to the environment. We are part of the environment, society, and the social impacts of the waste we're generating and this linear economy need to be taken into account as well. So if we put people at the center of the circular economy, we can build restorative economies that generate well-being and prosperity, which is inclusive of all its people through all new forms of economic production and consumption. And we can maintain and regenerate this economy and human and natural environment. Next slide. So this is just, I've just got a couple of examples of some of the work that is being done in South Africa. South Africa has got a plastics pact. So this is part of the International Plastics Pact, which is an initiative by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And there's a lot of industry and businesses that are part of this. They've got targets to reduce plastic, single-use plastic usage. So it's really good to know that this is going on at a high level. We also have the South African Alliance to End Plastic Waste, Pollution in the Environment. A lot of good work being done in this as well. A lot of cleanups and that kind of thing. So really important stuff. And South African government is working on extended producer responsibility. It's been a legal requirement in South Africa for the last 2 years. We're just coming to the end of the second year. And Tina's going to speak a little bit more about this as well. Really good initiative. How do we make producers responsible for the end of life of the products that they are placing on the market? So a really important piece of this puzzle that we need to move towards a circular economy. We're also very lucky in South Africa. We have a very good recycling standard. It's mechanical recycling, but we have quite a high recycling rate. And I think what's important is that we need to design our products to be recycled where we can't avoid them. And we've got a lot of design for recycling guidelines, and these are very important guidelines that need to be followed. Next slide. Then there's also the African Circular Economy Network. It works throughout Africa. And what's quite important about this is that Africa has been using circular circular economy principles for generations. And the ASEAN, or the Circular Economy Network, is working in 31 countries across Africa, linking the different countries, the different initiatives, so that we can learn from experience as well. But they've also got other international linkages so that we can learn from other countries' experience in circular economy, and that they can learn from the African examples as well. Next slide. So I think this is the next slide. What can I do? This is really what some really nice examples that I wanted to show, because a lot of the stuff we see leaves us feeling maybe a little bit powerless. Those headlines are depressing. What can we do as individuals? We know that there's a lot going on at a high level or in industry or government levels, but how does this impact us? So we can play a very important role in this. We can be part of this transition to a circular economy. It starts with us, and it's a collaboration between us as the consumers, but also the decisions that we can make in the businesses and the industries we work in, and then the high-level decisions we can feed into as well. So to start off, we really need to rethink the way we make things, whether you're making them in your industry, your business, or even in your home environment. We need to rethink the ingredients and packaging that we choose for our products, but also that we accept. We need to start to hold brand owners and producers accountable for the products that they are selling to us. We are wanting to buy products, not packaging, for example. We also need to rethink the environmental and social ethics of suppliers and the true impact of their products and packaging across their life cycle. We need to think of what is happening after we put that bag out on the pavement. Where is that going? What is the impact? So there's no need to go back to the 60s, but we can learn from a lot of what we had, of the systems we had in place before we had this abundance of plastic that was so easy to produce. What about returning to refillable and returnable packaging systems? Because this can create economic opportunities too, especially in a country like ours, where job creation is such an important part of what we do. So these systems are amazing. So this company, Bottle Traders, I'm in no way advertising or affiliated to any of these companies, but there's some really amazing examples out there. Bottle Traders is a third generation business. They wash wine bottles and spirit bottles, they repalletize them, and then they sell them back into the industry for refilling. And what is so interesting about their example is that it makes environmental sense, but also business sense. They've been doing this since before the term circular economy was coined. So it just makes sense, which is why I like this example. Next slide. We are quite familiar with reusable packaging. I think almost everybody owns a reusable cup now. Some of us probably too many. But we also need to continue to use them. They mustn't just sit in the kitchen cupboard. And there are a lot of coffee shops that will give you a discount for using your own cup. The other examples of reusable packaging, so craft beer and these really fillable growler bottles is really, really popular in South Africa and Cape Town. And we need to support these kind of industries. Reuse systems are also making their way into personal hygiene products, such as razors, for example. They've really redesigned razor blades to be much more usable and friendly. And this next example is is another example that I'm really fond of and a great supporter of. So Palesa Pads is an organization that came about not again for environmental reasons, but they came up with this concept of sustainable system to help girls address period poverty. So a lot of girls don't go to school when they have their period because they simply cannot afford sanitary products. So Palesa Pads have designed and developed really great reusable sanitary towels, and they provide girls in poor communities with a whole kit that comes with soap and a bucket so they can wash them and they don't miss school anymore. This is also another example of a great circular economy idea, but the heart of this is actually a social need. So where people are actually benefiting probably far more than the environment. So it's a really, really great initiative. Okay, next slide. Okay, so yeah, this is just a slide with the different variety of pads that they provide. So we've spoken a lot about packaging. We've heard that plastic is a serious problem. I'm not necessarily anti-plastic. Plastic has a purpose, and we need to design our packaging to be fit for purpose. But wherever we can take the opportunity to reduce or not use packaging, we need to do that. So these are just a couple of examples from hotels and conferences where we're moving away from single-use items to reusable, washable systems. Something else that's become quite popular in South Africa is compostable packaging. And we've just had our first producer responsibility organization for compostable or biodegradable packaging registered under the EPR regulations. But what's really important about compostables is that they need to be part of a system. They need to be collected separately. They need to go into a separate system. They can't be recycled the way plastic can. They need to be recycled in a compost system where they actually form a very important part of a regenerative system. But they're only applicable for certain applications. Compostable packaging breaks down over time, but it's the perfect answer for that plastic that goes over the cucumber, extends the life of a cucumber, and it can go into your compost bucket with the end of your cucumber. So I think what I'm trying to stress is that it needs to be fit for purpose, and compostables are not necessarily the answer for everything. And they're not going to get us out of our mess the way we expect recycling to. Another big problem we're facing, clothing in landfill, and we see this a lot. Very good clothing, reusable, still wearable, ending up in landfill. Next slide. This is an image of clothing that's being put out to dry so that it can be sold or reworn. And we've heard stories of and spoken to people who are collecting clothes, and then they are sending them to other countries or to their families in other provinces to either be sold or to be worn. So why is this ending up in our landfill? So here's another example of Second Take, where it's a second-hand high-end clothing boutique store. So it specializes in designer brands and provides people the opportunity to buy secondhand clothes that are high fashion items, just maybe not of this season. We've got your best friend's closet. So this is an online wardrobe of designer dresses that you can rent. So this rental model goes very well with the circular economy concept of a service model. You just want the dress for one night. You don't want it forever. And then someone else can use it, and it's not going to end up just hanging in your cupboard and ultimately in the landfill site. Another really great example is Rewoven. So this is a company owned by 3 young innovators who use design thinking principles to better understand this problem of textile waste in South Africa. Next slide. So they started a pilot project, that's 3 of them pictured there, where they started collecting off-cut fabric from 5 clothing manufacturers. And they've really grown since then, and they now sell materials and products from recycled textile waste. And since they've started up, they've managed to divert over 1 million kilograms of textile waste from landfill. So these are the kind of initiatives that we really need to support. Next slide. So what is required? We need a collaborative approach. I've mentioned this already, but it's towards the design and after-use systems, which will increase the reuse, maintain, and repair and recycling economics of the products and services we use. It needs to be a concerted cross-value chain global approach to improve the design, the reuse uptake, economics, and quality. We need to enable secondary markets for recycled materials through the introduction and scale up of matchmaking mechanisms, industry commitments, and or policy interventions. And most importantly, we need to design for next use so that we all have a role we can play in this. We need to support the businesses with these ideas, and we need to start to incorporate these businesses into our households and businesses and industries. So just to end off, there's this quote from William McDonough: to eliminate the concept of waste means to design things, products, packaging, and systems from the very beginning on understanding that waste does not exist. Okay, next slide. And yeah, thank you. I just want to encourage everyone to be positive and be part of the change. We have the opportunity to drive this change by the choices that we make.
Thanks, Bonti. Thank you. So we can see that the circular economy has got a really key role to play in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Another statistics is that they can possibly, the strategies can potentially cut emissions by 40% by 2050. They reduce the demand for raw materials, as we've seen, and new products, and help reduce global emissions that come from extraction and processing of materials. Sorry, I'm not sure you can hear me. So again, as I said, I'm going to be looking at what are the policies in South Africa? Are we meeting what we should be doing? Are we meeting sustainability? Is it driving sustainability as it should be? Where does South Africa compare internationally? I've done some comparative studies. What is South Africa's position on the global treaty? And then again, the important role of the informal reclaimers. They really play a significant part of the material value chain in African cities, and therefore it's really important to consider their role. It's really important from a socio-economic perspective to transition to a sustainable economy. So our main regulations are in place in South Africa to drive the circular economy include, as Bonti mentioned, the extended producer responsibility in terms of our National Environmental Management Waste Act, and current and emerging plastic waste regulations. And I'm going to briefly go through those two together. NEMWA, or the Waste Act, is obviously underpinned by waste hierarchy, which we know, and that's also given effect through by the waste management strategy. It's definitely shifting, we can see, from a focus of landfill to recycling, reuse, and recovery, but we've got a lot of work to do. Okay, so next slide. One of the objectives of the National Management Waste Strategy is to minimize the environmental impact of economic activity by reusing and recycling processed materials to minimize the need to extract raw materials from the environment and the need to dispose of waste. So if we look at where the strategy is and where we're planning to go in South Africa, it's premised on 3 pillars. The first, really important, is a zero waste to landfill commitment. Cleaner communities is really important, and well-managed and financially stable waste services. So that's where we're headed towards. Although all 3 pillars tie into our strategic climate change objectives, Pillar 1 really speaks to the circular economy, so the zero waste to landfill, as we saw in Bonti's diagram. The long-term expected is zero waste to landfill, but the 15-year target is 70% of reduction, so that's a large amount. We've got a circular economy guideline, which was published in 2020. It really focuses on the circular economy, material flow, materials value chain, and gives examples of how we can adopt circular practices into the materials value chain. As we've said, South Africa now has implemented the extended producer responsibility regulations. It refers to the financial or physical responsibility of producers across various value chains to ensure the sustainable treatment and disposal of post-consumer products. They took effect in 2021, so we've had them around for 2 years. They provide a framework for the implementation of EPR schemes and ensure the effective management of identified products to the end of its life. It's a really important point, the identified products that need to be managed to the end of their lives. They require registration, producers to register. Importantly in South Africa, which is one of the differences that I've seen comparatively internationally, is a producer is any category of persons, including a brand owner and a producer, manufacturer, a converter, and a refurbisher. It's a wide category of persons that it applies to. And that is different to some of the jurisdictions overseas that have extended producer responsibility regulations in place. Some of the things that need to be done, we know that they have to be registered. They have to either have their own scheme or join a scheme, which includes the entire value chain of the product. They need to be accountable for the scheme. And really important for circular economy is conduct a life cycle assessment in relation to the identified product. and that's within 5 years of the implementation of the schemes, and those are going to be reassessed by the Department of Environmental Affairs. The life cycle is really important from a circular economy point of view, because as a focus on a minimum, you've got to put your minimization of material used in the identified product, the design of the product to facilitate its reuse, recycling or recovery, without compromising the functionality of the product. So that life cycle assessment of the products is going to be assessed within 5 years from the implementation of the schemes. Members of the schemes have got to pay a fee, and that's based on various factors such as weight of the product, the ease it can be recycled, the demand of the material for recycling purposes. There's 5 registered EP schemes. Interestingly, we've had 3 brought out this year, introduced this year. So we've had the paper and packaging and lighting and electrical. And in 2023 in March, 3 new schemes were established, and those include the portable battery, the pesticide, and the lubricant oil sector. So we've introduced some more sectors into these EPR schemes. So just some targets in terms of emerging plastic waste regulations. Again, the National Waste Management Strategy sets out where we're intending on going on targets. So there is a target of 80% reduction in the production of single-use plastics. There's reduction of 70%, you'll see 60%, 90% of metals recycled. And then there's 40 to 55 to 70 of waste needs to be diverted from landfill in the coming years. So by 2025, 2030, and 2035 respectively. So those dates are really not far off, where we're aiming to have almost 70% of the waste that we have diverted from landfill. The department, as I said, has to review their schemes, and they're also going to be reviewing the life cycle assessments 5 years from the implementation of the schemes, and that's in relation to the identified products. And there you'll see the circular economy really, I think, really doing its work in terms of those life cycle assessments of the products. The Environmental Conservation Act deals with plastic bags and carrier bags, and by 2027 there's a requirement that those are made from 100% recyclable material. Okay, so there's quite strong targets. Okay, where does South Africa stand on the UN Treaty on Plastic Pollution? So our ministers confirmed that South Africa supported its development, and we've recognized that plastic pollution poses a threat to human health, ecosystem functioning, and the marine environment. But just like the just transition to decarbonisation, there's issues, and they're really important. And we've got to look at South Africa from the context within what it's in. We've got to look at the just transition. We've got to look at protecting the marginalised sectors of the community in doing this. And any obligations that are imposed with us have to be looked at in that context. South Africa has a significant plastic industry, sustains 60,000 formal jobs. As I said, we're a developing country. We need to consider this just transition and any obligations that are imposed on us. We've got to recognise reclaimers play an important role in reducing plastic pollution. And it's been submitted that obviously we'll need adequate and predictable financial resources. This is to develop these requirements that will be in place. And that ties into the transition, as I said, to decarbonisation. So where are we? How are we doing? As I said, the EPR regulations have been in place for 2 years. In terms of the zero draft of the international treaty, draft EPR emerges as a large focus, and where it's possible that the UN will mandate that countries adopt principles of EPR. So, we're already there, which is really quite a good, I think, indication of where we're at. The establishment of schemes apparently has resulted in the removal of 300,000 tonnes of plastic waste. So that's only in the last 2 years. It supported between 60 and 90,000 waste reclaimers. That number is also not official because we don't know how many waste reclaimers there really are. There's been collaboration from the private sector through the EPR schemes to reach this target of reduction of landfill over 5 years. In May 2023, 4 initiatives were launched. So there's been a demonstration fund launched and a science, technology and innovation strategy. And these are aimed by the CSIR. They're going to draft reports to aim at what opportunities are available for South Africa in various sectors across, including the waste sector. The schemes have only been established in the last 2 years. So, my view is it too early to tell really, are we on the sustainability path or not? I mean, there's some positive results, but it's too early. I think we need to give it time to see how these schemes are working. There's been some issues with the schemes, and they're streamlining them, and there's a lot of things that are being developed. The regulations are fairly complex on EPR regulations, so we'll see how that works. But the positive is that given that South Africa is a developing country, we actually compare comparatively well. I did a comparative analysis with the UK and Australia, and the fact that we have them in place already, and they've been in place for 2 years, we're actually doing quite well. I'm going to move on to the informal reclaimers because they've got such a really important part to play in developing countries, especially Africa and South Africa. After my talk, there's going to be a video presentation by Tanya Zak and Mark Lewis, where they really show the really crucial role that informal reclaimers play as the first responders in the pursuit of a climate-resilient world. So for those who are not familiar with the term, reclaimers are individuals who collect reusable and recyclable materials from residential bills, landfill sites, we saw some pictures, open spaces, the street, to revalue them and regenerate an income. They provide a really important sector. So just some examples on the studies and statistics. In 2021, study indicated that informal waste pickers diverted 51% of all paper and packaging collected from South Africa in 2017. And they estimated to have saved municipalities between 300 and 700 million in landfill space. You saw there that that's a real issue of the landfill space that we're grappling with. They played a critical role in collecting 80 to 90% of used packaging, and they make a substantial role to our recycling efforts. From a sustainability perspective, they play a fundamental role in assisting in achievement of a number of the Sustainable Development Goals. Just a few examples: Sustainable Development 1, poverty, 8, decent work, 10, reducing inequality, 11, sustainable cities and communities, and sustainable production. So they really are doing a good job. Despite this, though, they're not acknowledged. Historically, they haven't been acknowledged. The materials are collected from dump sites and streets. They remain the workforce that has the highest exposure to social, economic, and health risks without any social or occupational protection. They have, until recently, until the EPR regulations, only been paid for the value of the materials, which is a problem because it's highly variable, and not for the collection service they provide. They're actually not paid for the service, but that has changed. Another quote from WIGO from Mr. Kodasang. He says, "The invisible subsidy we don't see is the subsidy of free labor of our informal waste reclaimers, a marginalized sector of our community forced to seek out a livelihood through the resource value only from the sale of recyclables. We can't have a recycling industry based on the free labor of poor people. This has to change." So there really has to be a formalizing of their role. Apparently in discussions, somebody was speaking to me the other day and said that they really want to be integrated and recognized for the important work they do. It's not only about the money. They really want to be recognized as a part. They really play a huge role that we don't see in the circular economy. But there needs to be work done at the municipal level. If we draw on from the Brazilian experience, municipalities, they are able to hire reclaimer cooperatives as service providers in the municipal waste system. So we need to do some work, I think, with our municipalities in getting to a similar position as in Brazil. That's actually working very well. Positively, South Africa, there's been steps to recognize waste pickers who actually apparently prefer being called reclaimers. NEMWA provides opportunities for reclamation activities in terms of the waste hierarchy. The National Management Waste Strategy recognizes their role. In 2020, there was a waste picker integration guideline for South Africa published, which really sets out some kind of tools for the municipality to implement and work with these reclaimers. Interestingly, there in the guideline, they actually estimate the number of reclaimers to be between 60 and 215,000. So we don't even know how many they are. And finally, the 2021 EPR regulations require a requirement for PROs to integrate formal waste collectors, reclaimers, and pickers into post-consumer value, and compensate waste reclaimers that are now registered on a South African waste registration system. Up until, I think, March or May this year, only 7,300 waste reclaimers are registered until recently, yeah. Hey? Is less. Yeah, so I've just compared numbers of, we think there's 60 between 200,000 and only a few have registered. So the registration process is slow, and only waste reclaimers that are registered will get paid for the services they provide. It's currently sitting at 15 cents for the services. And I think that's also being negotiated and streamlined with them. So they are being recognized, but there are some issues that we need to get over and I think finalize. We need to get them registered, and that's an important thing. Registration mustn't be seen as job creation. It's actually just recognizing them for the informal work they do. And the value of that work. So it's building on their strengths of their work, not replacing it with the registration. So as I said, there's been significant development. Countries like Ghana, Nigeria, there's no recognition of these informal workers, although they play the same important role. So as I said, South Africa, I think, has moved on and done quite a good job. There's a lot of NGO initiatives and associations, which I'm sure everyone's heard of. The South African Waste Pickers Association, the EPR Association of South Africa, WIGO, Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, and the African Reclaimers Organization. And they really seek to deal with issues between reclaimers and also between the municipalities and reclaimers. Issues such as opposition to privatization of landfill sites, which will then prevent the reclaimers from going onto those sites. There's been some development at municipal level, but there needs to be a lot more. There's been material recovery facilities at some of the municipalities in Durban, and also setting up areas, providing them with training, providing them with PPE, which they don't, personal protective equipment. I think to conclude, just to say that to build on an inclusive circular economy, they need to be recognized as key stakeholders. They don't contribute only to the collection and recycling, but also alleviate some socio-economic challenges. We've seen, I gave you the statistics, 85% of of people in Africa actually rely on this work as a means of employment. So it's again that consideration of a just transition and an inclusive just transition. Some key points is that it's not only to include reclaimers as part of landfilling and recycling, but to be part of this initiative from the beginning. They know which materials are valued, they know which materials work as recycling. So involve them at the design phase, not at the end phase, which is what we're doing. The working conditions of reclaimers need to be improved, and we need to promote reclaimer integration, which we've done. As I said, integration is really important for them from a formal perspective to be recognized for the work that they do, and ensure that there's fair compensation for both the materials, not only materials, but the services they provide. So we're gonna move on to Tanya Zach's video with photographs by Mark Lewis. It's really an interesting video. It's only 14 minutes long. It shows the lives of individual waste reclaimers. And I wanted to end off with a quote before I hand over to the video, by one of the waste pickers, which was on one of the site, and it said, if women are not integrated, then it's not waste picker integration. The majority of workers that do this work are women. So I'm going to just read her introduction. Every waste reclaimer's daily routine and life circumstances are different. Nevertheless, these vignettes touch on some of the experiences of work life and intersections of crisis of poverty that impact many reclaimers and that impact women in particular ways. On South Africa's streets, these reclaimers are often the only mitigation to climate change that households are participating in. Enormous volumes of waste are being diverted from landfill sites through informal work. These stories touch on the effort of working and living circumstance, as well as on dreams pursued and realized by the women in the informal waste economy. Thanks. I'll hand over to the video now.
I'm Tanya Zach. This presentation, Dignity and Labour, Women in the Informal Waste Sector, is based on photo essays that are drawn from a book, Wake Up, This is Joburg, that was authored by me with photographs by Mark Lewis. It is also drawn from interviews and portraits we created for the Waste Integration website of South Africa. Every reclaimer's daily life and routine Good day, I'm Tanya Zak. This presentation, Dignity and Labour, Women in the Informal Waste Sector, is based on photo essays that are drawn from a book, Wake Up, This is Joburg, that was authored by me with photographs by Mark Lewis. It is also drawn from interviews and portraits we created for the waste integration by Mark Lewis. It is also drawn from interviews and portraits we created for the waste integration web. Every reclaimer's daily life and routine is different. Nevertheless, these vignettes touch on some of the experiences of work life and the intersections of crises of poverty that impact many reclaimers and that impact women in particular ways. On South Africa's streets, these reclaimers are often the only mitigation to climate change that households are participating in. Enormous volumes of waste are being diverted from landfill sites through informal work. Yet that work is unpaid. Reclaimers rely on the proceeds from the sale of materials for their livelihood. A procession of recyclers, each pulling a cart towering with bulging Hessian bags up Jan Smuts Avenue in the early evening, is a common Johannesburg sight. One day, however, I do a double take as I pass. The tall figure at the helm of a group of 5 waste pickers is a woman. Naleli Khomo's running commentary floats across the heads and the loads of the men following her. Her voice drowns out the sound of hard plastic wheels on the tarmac. It seems to encourage the group and to distract from the weight they are hauling. Her advanced pregnancy does not appear to slow her passage. Naleli calls out to me in Sesotho. "Look at our work," she says. "We work hard. We are feeding ourselves." Naleli and Lebo Selemela, who always walks directly behind her in the procession and fills 2 massive sacks each day, maintain their families at home in Lesotho with their daily commute to the outer suburbs of the city and back. Only weeks before their son Hotso is born, Naleli and Lebo are evicted from a building in Doornfontein. 2 blocks away, they find a 2-meter square makeshift room that will curiously be labeled a flat in the Supreme Court of Appeal's judgment in the matter between the city and the landlords and the unlawful occupiers of this building. Their so-called flat is one of nearly 100 living spaces in the warehouse. The city's legal counsel will speak of a building not suited to human habitation. He will mention the lack of toilet facilities and water, and that electricity is sourced from illegal connections. He will note that refuse and human waste litter the public. To return to work a couple of months after the baby is born, because the lady down the passage takes care of the child. We meet Lebo a week after their son Hotso is born. The new father is smiling, but he shakes his head. He says that Naleli tried to go back to work 2 days after the birth. He was forced to hide and then sell her trolley to keep her at home. 2 years later, Naleli is working alone. Lebo is limping badly, and when he removes his sandals, he points to the black, puffy spots on the undersides of his feet. He has not worked for 7 months. These days, Naleli is working in the nearby Hillbrow area alone. She has a cold and an almost permanent headache. Her back and legs are sore, but she seems to pull the trolley effortlessly across the road and up the Nugget Street hill. As she walks, she shouts greetings and exchanges news with 2 other women reclaimers. Then she passes the notorious tenement-style buildings that squat across the ridge and seem to taunt Johannesburg's efforts at gentrification. To the left of the Hillbrow Tower, she walks up the hill, and the tower begins its watch over her 5-hour passage. Naleli stops in the cold shadow of a 13-floor residential tower block adorned with satellite dishes. A cleaner wheels bins onto the sidewalk. Naleli covers her hand with a plastic bag and plunges it into the bins. In addition to the usual paper and plastics that she is collecting, she collects glass bottles and picks up metal pipes and frames that lie near the bins. I ask if she's afraid of rats in the dustbins. She says the only rats she's ever seen in Hillbrow are dead. When she arrives at a main intersection in the business area, she stops. A boy pulls his cart close to hers, and they chat while she gives him glass bottles and metal, and he loads plastic bottles into her sack. Weeks later, Lebo is sitting on the roadside overseeing rows of bottles. He has become an intermediary, buying bottles from reclaimers and then on-selling them. He makes 70 cents on each bottle and is able to contribute 650 Rand to their monthly income. It's not enough to cover their living expenses and the creche fees, so they have to send their son Khotso to live with relatives in Lesotho. We meet other mothers who have to bring their babies to reclaiming sites. Eva Mokwena is working on the truck, weighing materials today as part of her organizing task as a member of Arrow's organizing team. Her duties include assisting with the weighing of materials, as she has today, dealing with complaints, especially if any women are not being treated fairly, she says, negotiating with the municipality when reclaimers are threatened with eviction, briefing lawyers, brokering agreements between different groups of reclaimers, and addressing groups of reclaimers or residents. Eva is not daunted by her work as a chairperson of Arrow. Let me put it like this, she says. I'm a tigress, I'm a fighter. I like people to respect each other, no matter who they are. I won't see anybody getting bullied. She laughs. Actually, I like this work. What I've noticed is it gives you time, strength, and courage, and it builds your self-esteem. If I didn't work as a reclaimer, I would never have built the courage to fight for my rights or other people's rights. I would not have learned the skill I have to talk to anyone, or to talk to academics, or to talk in front of a crowd of 300 or 400 people, or to have worked with Arrow, who has already won 3 big awards. Eva lives in an informal settlement on weeknights. She explains, I'm staying here to be close to my work. The transport cost would be 450 Rand a week if I stayed with my kids in Orange Farm. I don't have to stand on the side of the road and beg with a cardboard, France Fourie says. Every night when we get home, we have a plate of food. The family works wordlessly. They are an unusual sight amongst the ranks of reclaimers. They are white, and they work collectively, pulling their cart together and lifting and carrying items in silent cooperation. This is the first work Mari has done since their daughter, who also lives with them, was born 40 years ago. Their church is sponsoring their first family holiday ever, but Marie doesn't rely on the church or anyone else for charity. I bring money in, she says matter-of-factly, and no one can look down on me. Begazela is the name of a long-abandoned school in central Johannesburg in the shadow of the M1 motorway. The buildings are now occupied by some 300 waste reclaimers and other informal workers. Begazela means to endure or to persevere in isiZulu. Nomsa Zozi started reclaiming in 2012. Like others, her home is refashioned using objects and materials she collects. Workers who live here alone or with their families are constructing a community in this area where sorting and storage of waste occurs alongside the living space, and where spaza shops, artisans, and a creche are hosted in the old school buildings. In a city seething with poverty, many live simultaneously excluded from and in the center of the systems and the spaces of the city. This dual existence is echoed in the discarded objects that are made familiar and personal once again to create intimate space. At the Marie-Louise landfill site, the chalky colors of hundreds of sorting bags are arranged in clusters around reclaimers who are standing, bending, or sitting as they sort material, or who, like Alice Mahlele, have climbed into the bags to stamp and compact materials deep inside the bags. Underfoot, the twisted and flattened discarded objects, packaging, bottles, foodstuffs, and sanitary ware that have been twisted and flattened and squeezed out of their distinctive forms display muted versions of their original colors, except for the plastic bottle tops. Middens of brightly colored bottle tops are pressed into the landfill, stubbornly resisting recycling or decay. They crunch shell-like underfoot on the soft padded ground, where even a single step can sink a boot foot deep into the soft waste. Egret, ibises, and if you can believe it, even seagulls flock around the dump. The energy of the landfill site shifts as the first trucks begin to arrive. People who have been huddled over their storage bags pick up empty bags and move from all directions towards the truck that is reversing to the face of the dump. In reverse gear, drivers have limited views of the rear of their vehicles, and so it is up to reclaimers to move out of the way to keep safe here. Reclaimers wait on either side and at the back of the truck until it stops. As men begin to unlock the mechanism that releases the dumpster, the first fumes hit the nostrils of the reclaimers. This is compacted waste that is churned in the truck for a few hot hours. It doesn't spill so much as ooze out of the truck backside like a sausage. And when the last of the waste has been pushed out, the truck moves forward a bit to lift its tail higher, and the debris that is accumulated in the crevices and the corners of the dumps to drop out. And for the final insult, it tips the rear end right up and drains the effluent fluid that is pooled in the tip over the rubbish. Reclaimers who have stood back and watched while the truck offloads now move forward swiftly and start pulling material from the heap. Most of the reclaimers who work at the top of the dump in the morning shift are elderly. Pauline Mamabola shouts from where she's leaning against a large upright bag of materials. She wants to tell her story. Come talk with me, she yells. And she talks about her children. I have paid for my 3 children from this work. One works for the police force, one works for South African breweries, and one is in college. I am a single mother, she says. Paulina saves her money in a post office account. She is building a 6-roomed house in Limpopo. Of the women working on the landfill site, Justine Kuela says, even though we respect each other and we are not in danger here, as women there are things that do not make us feel proud. We have no privacy here. Even if you are sick or pregnant, you have to go to change in front of people. She adds there are no toilets. Women must go to the veld to relieve themselves. You can't know what will happen there. And sometimes women are sick. They might have TB, but they continue working because they are breadwinners. When she was pregnant in 1997 and again in 2008 and was working on the landfill every day, she was overwhelmed by the smell. I was vomiting left, right, and center, she says, but I worked until 2 days before delivery. Nokotula Moyo works the second shift of the day. Due to the number of people, they decided to split us into 2 groups. Many of those working the second shift are Zimbabwean. Working here changed my life. I can buy my children food and clothing. She has also built a 1-roomed house in Zimbabwe. And she pays rent in Bromfisherville. Nokotula's 3 older children live in Zimbabwe with their grandmother. Her 4-year-old lives with her and her partner in their back room behind an RDP house in Bromfisherville. When Francelina came from the Eastern Cape to Bloemfontein in 2004, she hoped to make a living by dressmaking, but payments were slow and unreliable. In 2006, she went to the southern landfill site in Mangaung. There she met a man who taught her how to collect recyclables. But as importantly, he taught her how to save, and he encouraged her to keep her focus on earning and saving for a goal. She took that advice seriously. Years later, as an organizer amongst reclaimers, she passes her lessons on. Francelina lives in Heidedal. It is a 1.5-hour walk from the landfill site. She makes that journey to and from the site every weekday. She leaves home at 6 a.m. and works 9 to 10 hours each day. She has worked at the landfill for 15 years. In that time, she has saved consistently. Over the last few years, she has invested most of her earnings in her RDP house. I started extending my house in 2013, says Francelina. I'm a single parent. I did all of this alone, she says, of her achievements in educating and housing her children. Her savings pattern is to save 100 rand in a stokvel every day. Every 5 weeks, she gets 2,500 rand from the stokvel. She then deposits 2,000 rand in another stokvel. And when she receives her earnings of 12,000 rand from that savings club, she uses the money for building materials. When she had completed the walls of her home, she took an interest-free loan of 25,000 rand from her savings society to build the roof. She is currently paying off the last 4,000 rand of the loan. In this way, she has built on 5 extra rooms and has built 4 outside rooms to rent out. Some of the materials, including the floor tiles that she used in the extension of her house, were found at the landfill site.
It's clear that for South Africa, the transition to a circular economy needs to promote a sustainable and resilient socio-economic transformation. while promoting opportunities for the most vulnerable people in local settings. This is exactly the same argument as decarbonisation as in the waste. We've got to really bring in the local context in South Africa for our cities to attain a sustainable and just inclusive circular economy. Specific considerations need to be given to adopt practices that are rooted in the local context. Thanks very much, and I hope you've enjoyed it today. Thank you.